I'm Anthony Brown. I'm chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the environment. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for this session with Lord Deben, who's sitting in his garden with his rose tree behind him. Before I do the formal introduction, just a little bit of housekeeping. I know now with these Zoom calls, people come and go, but if you could put yourself on mute, please, if you're not speaking. There is this whole session is going to be recorded, and we will make the recording available to members afterwards. But it'll only record the speaker, the person who's actually speaking, rather than the general view of everybody who isn't speaking. You can ask questions throughout the session. It's best if you do that. Some of you have submitted questions, but otherwise do it on the chat function if you go down the bottom, and you can do that throughout the session. And also, it's very useful for us to know who you are. I think most of you have been very well behaved. In fact, there's sometimes people don't have their actual name down, but if you go to the top right of your square, then there's 3 little dots, and you can actually enter your proper name in there. We plan to last for 1 hour, so it should be finished at 5:30. And thank you very much for joining us in the first virtual session of the APPG on the environment in this new world. I've just been voting in Parliament unvirtually, physically. I started voting about an hour ago. I voted about an hour ago, and I can see it's still going on. Thank you all for coming here. It's a great honour to have Lord Deben, former Cabinet Minister, Environment Secretary, currently Chair of the Committee on Climate Change, which, as I'm sure you all know, is the official government body that advises the government how to meet its target of becoming carbon neutral by 2050. He was due to speak to us just as the lockdown happened, but that got cancelled for obvious reasons, and it's great to have him back with us now. It's actually got particular urgency because, as you'll know, the economy has taken an absolutely extraordinary hit. There's the worst recession for 300 years, according to economists, and the Chancellor and the government generally will be focusing very much on how to get the economy to bounce back. But obviously, we want to make sure that happens in a way that supports the green agenda, green growth, the whole bounce back better. What I think we agree we want to resist is the temptation of a dash for growth at all costs, ditching green targets and so on. So how can we use this revival, this economic recovery phase to help the green agenda? So Lord Deben has agreed to speak for 15 minutes or so, share his thoughts on how to do that, and then we'll be open to questions. So over to you, John Deben. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here, if that's where I am, if you know what I mean. But the truth is that I rather object to the way in which people seem to talk as if there were an alternative which would be a quicker dash to growth, because it seems to me that that just isn't true. The fact is that the quickest way to
he's frozen.
Recapture up.
Oh, we seem to have lost him there. That's a bit of a pity. Everyone else is moving. Okay, hang on. We shall.
The idea that somehow or other we are campaigning for a particular response. I'm not campaigning for a green growth. I'm campaigning for growth, and it seems to me the only way we'll get growth is if we do so in a green manner. Because what we have shown is that proper investment results in a very much more economic use of our resources and a much more profitable society. So you only have to go to the extremely important decision of the Chancellor when he decided that he would allow 6.6 or where it was £1 billion worth of spending on offshore wind. What that meant was that by that investment, we now have one of the cheapest ways of generation that there is in the world. If we'd only been more sensible about onshore wind, I having been polite about the then Chancellor being very independent, then we might have got even faster, because there are many communities that wanted onshore wind and we stopped them doing that. That's a pity. I don't want it forced upon people, but it seems to me that that is the cheapest way of producing energy. So let's start by assuming what I believe to be utterly true, which that the future of jobs is growth, which is done in a sustainable manner. And we shouldn't be using this as a kind of rather miserable extremist green concept that somehow or other it's jolly good that we're not doing all the things that we were doing before. I'm very positive about this. I don't want to have a society which has ground to a halt and is only green because it can't do things. I want a society that is green because it does do things. It's a positive answer and not a negative one. So let's look at some of the things that we can do. First of all, we do have to recognize that there will be job losses of a very considerable kind. Are there things that we can immediately do to replace those? So let me take a single example. We now produce oil in this country at a price which is just too great for the prevailing oil price. And there's no sign that that prevailing oil price will suddenly shoot up again. So there will be real problems for those who are working in North Sea oil. This is therefore a remarkably good time to expand our investment in carbon capture and storage and usage, because that's precisely the part of the country and precisely the kind of jobs which could replace those that we are going to lose in that industry. Let's take another example. We have a huge opportunity here. People have discovered that actually the world is rather better with clean air than dirty air. And there'll be a good deal of pressure on, in a faster way, our turn to green energy in the terms of electric motor vehicles and the like. That we can certainly do. Already Grant Shapps, I think, has led the way in a remarkable manner. When he became Secretary of State, he very soon recognized that 2040 was far too late a date for us to turn the system over to selling entirely green electric vehicles, brought it forward to 2035. And even then, before COVID-19, he said he hoped he'd be able to do it earlier than that. Well, why not try to bring that further forward and start to build the kind of infrastructure and the jobs which will be available from that? Now, that may mean all sorts of interesting things. A fascinating conversation today with one of our largest logistics people. We've got some very funny laws in this country which really do need some help. For example, you're not allowed to use an electric-driven porter vehicle on the pavement, or indeed in a bicycle lane. And yet one of the things that we ought to be doing is moving things about in our cities by electricity rather than by the internal combustion engine. If you look at congestion in the City of London, it's largely caused by delivery. And unfortunately, our delivery vans are actually static for something like 74% of the time. This is a terrible invasion and an awful lot of pollution. We could overcome that by revolutionizing the way we deliver and changing the rules which make it easier for us to do that. We've got to look at an awful lot of the things that we do at the moment and make it possible to do things, because very often it's administrative action that stops us acting in those ways. Then we've got to look again at how we're using our soil and our land. There really is no better opportunity than to start to plant the trees that we need to plant and to create the horticultural industry extension and expansion that this would mean. Investment there makes a huge difference. And then, of course, there's so much that can be done on the front of renewables and the ancillaries to that. Renewables won't take us the whole way, although I'm a great enthusiast for renewable energy. I do think we're going to move into the hydrogen economy. But we won't do that unless we in Britain seize the opportunity. This is the moment to become the centre for the development of hydrogen. And we have a number of real advantages to be able to do that. There's a good deal of work already being done. The government could do a great deal more. So the first big step is to recognise that we are going to have to invest to get the economy going. Where the new jobs are is investing in the green economy, and where the opportunities are investing in a sustainable society, because other countries will want to buy our products only if they are products which help them in their development in a green direction. And the second big thing is we have also to remove from our economy the things that stop us doing these things properly. The willingness of the government not to continue to make it difficult to have onshore wind, I hope is an example of what it's going to do right across the board. The fact of the matter is that there are controls which are not helping in the development of a green economy. And I want to see a centre whereby people who find that they can't do the good things they want to do because of some rule or regulation can immediately put this point to a deregulation committee, which could then use deregulation as a green attitude. Now, that doesn't mean to say I'm not in favour of regulation. I am. I believe in good regulation. It always seems to me to be balmy to be opposed to regulation. Otherwise, we'd be driving on both sides of the road. It doesn't seem to be sensible. But what does seem to be important is that you need all the time to look at the regulations that you have to see whether there are some which stop you doing the green things that you ought to do. All sorts of bits of rules which make it very difficult, for example, to have small scale hydro generation, all sorts of things which are hangovers from previous and probably quite good reasons in the past. And then the third area, which I think we really have to deal with immediately, and that's the question of building and construction. The house building industry is a scandal. There is no doubt that for many years now, it has made a very good living by not building good houses. We are still building crap houses, and we're still hearing the house building industry asking for the government to make the changes when it could quite easily have built to a higher standard itself. But there is no doubt that the government must move rapidly to raise the standard so that we insulate buildings better, so that we ventilate buildings better, so that we build better for the future. And there is no reason to think that will increase the cost of housing. What it will do is to decrease the amount of money that builders will pay for land, because we all know how the economy works. It doesn't work on the basis of what the real cost is. What happens is that the builder decides how much he's going to get for his houses, and it's on that basis that he then decides how much it'll cost him to build them, and that's the price that he's prepared to pay for the land. If you have a slight decrease in the cost of building land, which you would have, that would do nobody any harm, and the person who's selling the land is still getting a very significant advantage over agricultural prices. So we could move immediately to that, and that would mean that we could also start being much more sensible about retraining and reskilling. We are in fact a country which hasn't done the retraining and reskilling that we ought to do. We don't have the skilled workers in the construction industry that we need. And therefore, if we set the higher standards so that we have to have those, and we provide through the educational system the training that is necessary, then we'll get the answers that we need. The last thing I want to emphasize, although there are so many others, is that the government has itself a wonderful opportunity here. It really needs to use its procurement policies to push the green economy and make it a reality. There's no doubt that many people complain about the fact that they try to build properly, they try to manufacture properly, but when it comes to competition with other companies, the government always goes not for the good answer, but for the cheapest answer. And I very often hear builders say this. Among our best builders are people who have failed to get jobs which they should have got because other people have undercut them by just being less sustainable and leaving the government with a building which costs them more to run. There's a lot to be done for the Treasury to see better how to measure the real costs of procurement. I just give you a terrible example. Every year, a company which I chair and I declare interest, called Sancroft, does a thing called the Sancroft Tussle Index. And this is to look at government procurement and then look at the adherence to the law on modern slavery that the companies which are most successful in procurement have. Well, if we take the top 100 companies, the companies which have got the largest amount of government procurement, 38% of them don't even obey the law on modern slavery. In other words, they don't do what the law tells them they have to. And of the rest, quite a high proportion only just do what the law absolutely insists upon them doing. Now, what is the government doing buying things from those companies? Instead of saying, we expect you to be able to show that you obey the law and that you obey the spirit of the law if you want to get our investment. And that's how you use investment to bounce back better. I do think that it is for government and local government to lead the way to make these choices which we all ought to make. And once there's a market, then of course you begin to get lower prices, you begin to get real competition, and you begin to get a green economy. And the real trouble is that we've proved that, and we still aren't doing it in so many areas. Offshore wind shows how it can be done. That was something done by a government whose chancellor was in the same party, and I speak as an independent chairman of the Climate Change Committee, as this chancellor. So there's no reason why you shouldn't copy him.
Okay, thank you very much for that fantastic introduction. I should just warn you, I've just been summoned to vote again. We're on the perils of being an MP, but the votes take so long. We might have finished this session before I have to. But if not, I'm just warning you and Cameron, as one of the deputy chairs, I might ask you to carry on chairing if I absolutely have to go. Thank you for that fantastic summary. I'm very optimistic about saying there isn't a distinction between green growth and growth; that it is all growth, and laying out the all the opportunities there are. You mentioned carbon capture and storage, but also bringing electric vehicles forward. As I say, we're open to questions, and do put in your questions in the chat, or you can try and wave, but I may not be able to see you because a lot of you have got your video turned off. We've got some questions submitted beforehand. So the first one from Callum Jones. In fact, we had, I don't know if Callum's here, got 3 questions, in fact. But the first one was, is there scope for increasing biofuel blend limits, such as the 7% limitation on biofuel and diesel? This would allow for displacement of more diesel, allowing a decrease in carbon emissions, and would support UK manufacturing. It's quite a specific question.
I have a problem with that, which is a very simple one, and that is that we're going to need the biofuels that we have got for a very wide range of things for which we have no alternative. I don't want to create a society in which we are so dependent upon biofuels for things like motor vehicles that we don't have enough of them of a sustainable kind to do some of the things that we'll need to do, for example, like aviation fuel, where the only future that the moment that we have is a sort of biofuel alternative. So I have a doubt always about putting too much emphasis on biofuels, although I'm very much in favor of them. I think we ought to be very careful to use them for the things for which we do not have an alternative. We do have an alternative for most diesel vehicles. It's called electric vehicles, and that's the route which we should seek to go down.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to ask one more question, then I have to go and vote as a three-line whip. Robin Bynes, actually, who's the secretary. I actually can't see him at the moment, but he's going to carry on sharing, and hopefully I'll be back quite quickly, but with this socially distanced queue, it might take a bit of time. The next question is from Bob Harris, who hopefully is here as well. How important does Lord Deben consider the remineralising of our UK soils? I mean, you did touch on soils in your opening remarks, but is that a good greenhouse gas capture?
Well, I think it's absolutely clear that we won't meet net zero unless we do something about our soil. It seems to me that this is a crucial part of what we should be doing. We have at least a 10% reduction in the fertility of our soil. The kinds of ways in which we have used that soil and the sort of agriculture which we have allowed to take place really is now out of date. And farmers know that. I mean, most farmers recognize that they've got to move in a direction which is much more sustainable, which is much more, which treats the soil with a degree of respect, which we haven't done up to now. So yes, there's a great deal to be done in that direction. I think environmental friendly farming is going to be a very, very central part of what we do. There are many ways in which you can still do that and produce the kind of yields that you need. I have to declare an interest. I have a small farm. Part of it is already organic. It'll all be organic when we have finished our program. And frankly, I do it not just because I think it's right, and I mean that in a sort of moral sense, because I do think the way we have treated the soil has been entirely wrong, but I do it because I think the future will lie in that it will be to have better food. All of us can do with eating less food, but there is every reason to say we'd be better off eating 20% less meat, but eating better meat. And we'd be much better eating better food generally. And that would be part of the battle against obesity, which, as we all know, is a very important battle to fight.
Hi there, I've taken over from Anthony, who's had to go off the vote. I hope you can hear me.
Hello, Robin.
Hi there. Hi, John. I've got another question actually from Callum Jones, second question, which didn't get asked the first time. How do you see the future of sustainable aviation fuel in the current climate?
Well, I think the aviation industry has a huge difficulty, and I'm not one of those who crows over it, because I do think that the ability to fly is a remarkable opportunity and something which has benefited the world a great deal. But the truth is that what we're doing now on Zoom will change the world, because people were very resistant to video conferencing and the like, largely because the systems that we had used when it began were a real pain. They didn't work. You had to go to a special room. When they didn't work, there was a special man who came to, or a woman who came and put it right, but actually they never did put it right. So you spent so much time waiting for people to come on that you really gave it up. What has happened now over the past 2 months is that all of us are using Zoom or Teams or one or other of these things. And we've suddenly discovered that really we don't need to go to places for many of the meetings that we have. And I believe that that will continue. And as business travel is the basis of most of the major airlines' profitability, I do think there will be really serious changes in the airline industry. And while that is being shaken out, then it will be difficult to see them spending a huge amount of money on the development that is necessary. And that may be one of the ways in which the government should be dealing with the industry. I'm not in favour of the government propping up an industry on the basis that we've got to have this company or that company. What I am in favour of is using the government resources to enable companies to restructure themselves in a green way. And the government should tie to any help that they give a very clear indication that they've got to reduce their emissions, they've got to seek better ways of flying, they've got to find ways of using biofuels much more widely than they do now.
Hi, I've got another question from Luke Thornton from FCC Environment. He says, have there been any attempts to incentivize the use of the current lull, excuse me, current lull in the use of infrastructure to make green upgrades or prepare for them. For example, it seems a good time to be digging out motorway services car parks to lay cables for future installation of EV charging points.
Well, it's also a very good time to review the roads programme and ask ourselves whether we should be spending these large sums of money on roads, and instead of which, why should we not be moving even more in the direction that Grant Shapps has already suggested, which is that we should be spending some of that money at least on bicycle lanes, that we should be spending some of that money also on more charging points. And I quite agree about the possibility of more work in on motorway service stations. The problem there is very often not the situation that we have that you're talking about, or your questioner is talking about. The problem there very often is that motorway service stations are some way from the centres of towns, and they just don't have the electricity connections that they need. And that is an area which we've got to do something about, not least because of the point that I made about institutions. It is much easier to get wayleaves to do broadband than it is to get wayleaves to lay electrical cables. And one of the things we've got to do is to make it easier to do these things and to change the way in which the administration works in order to offer those opportunities.
Thank you. I've got a question of my own here, actually, which is, what scale of impact do you think a change of administration in the USA in November would have?
Well, it is very difficult to talk about the United States today in a reasonably rational way, because whatever Americans may feel, the world outside is looking on with horror at the behavior of the president. Not only in his attitudes towards the environment, not only on his attitudes towards so many things, but now on his appalling attitudes towards racism. To have made that speech without invitation and permission outside a church holding the Bible, and actually making no reference to the years of racial discrimination which lie behind the murder of Mr. Floyd is really almost unspeakable. So the first difference it would make would be that it's almost impossible not to raise the standard of public debate, whoever were to beat him. As far as other things are concerned, well, there is a great deal of difficulty with the United States because it is a hugely divided country. And there are many parts, after all, of the United States where people haven't yet learned to believe in evolution, leave alone to believe in climate change. So we do have to recognize that it is a long, hard road. What is so exciting is that businesses in the United States, the great companies, have understood this. And so many of them are leading in the battle for sustainability. And a future President of the United States would have a very significant industrial base of companies that do understand that the future is one which demands sustainable development and not the kind of disgraceful attitudes which we've seen for the past 4 years.
Thank you. Next question is from Alison Fulford. We have a climate crisis and biodiversity crisis. Do you believe there is enough action to protect and enhance biodiversity when talking about the green recovery?
No, I don't. And indeed, I always have a problem with trying to make a difference between these two. It seems to me that one of the most remarkable insights that we've had is the insight of the Pope in his encyclical Laudato Si, which I do believe is the best introduction to the realities of climate change that has been written. In a very short space of time, he puts these issues all together. And the one thing which he has emphasized, which I find very creative in this, is that climate change is actually a symptom of what we've done to the earth. And we have to look at it like this, so that the destruction of biodiversity is a part of the way in which we have treated the earth, putting greed before any kind of stewardship. And we've really got to recover the real role of the human being, which is to garner and guard the earth. And you can't garner unless you guard. You can't gather, you can't live off unless you look after for the future. And it is to recover that we desperately need. And that will lead us to have a very much stronger view about biodiversity. And that leads me to say that I am very concerned about our 25-year plan, which DEFRA has got, which is really not worth the paper it's written on unless there are actual promises with real dates and actual money to deliver. I can write the most lovely statement about how wonderful it could be and what we could do and what we should do. It doesn't happen unless you've actually got a program, unless you can hold the government to it. And my sadness is that neither the Environment Bill nor the Agriculture Bill are tough enough. Neither of them have got the sort of rules and standards and decisions which you can hold the government to. All they've got are permission for ministers to do certain things. There's no force in these acts to insist that they be done, and to insist that if they are not done, then the full force of the law forces the government to do what it has promised.
Thank you. I know Barbara Young wants to ask a question on the US trade deal and green recovery. Barbara, do you want to unmute yourself and actually ask it?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I've got a dodgy Wi-Fi connection. John, you're an old hand around these things. If you were advising us on how to handle the American trade deal negotiations, what would you be saying about the kind of fence that the government's got itself on, where it's giving strong assurances about maintaining standards for environment and food safety and workers' protection and animal welfare, but at the same time, in order to get a deal out of the Trump administration, they're going to have to sell these away? Advise.
Well, the first thing is, in any negotiations I've ever done, I've always thought it best not to surrender before you start. And that seems to me to be the way in which some people have been talking in the government. And I put it very clearly. It is absolutely unacceptable to make trade agreements which do not include climate change within their remit. What are we to do to suggest that we do a trade agreement with Mr. Bolsonaro on the basis that we will buy from him goods which he can only produce because he is cutting down the rainforest upon which we depend for the protection of our climate? So let's be realistic. Liz Truss was wrong to say that she was not going to take into account the issue of climate change in trade dealing. And then when you come to the other issues that you talk of, the fact is the Conservative Party manifesto was perfectly clear. It said that it was going to maintain these high standards. You cannot maintain those high standards if you allow into this country goods which do not meet those standards. The reason that we've been able to maintain them is that they do obtain right across the European Union, and that is how we maintain them. But you cannot ask our farmers to have an animal welfare code, to have an environmental code, to have a food safety code, which costs money, and then ask them also to have the competition from people who don't meet those codes. And I also don't think you can say that to the British people. The fact is that America has significantly more foodborne disease than we do. And the reason that one doesn't like chlorinated chicken is not because of the chlorination, which we know perfectly well is perfectly safe, not very nice, but perfectly safe. but it's because they have to chlorinate their chickens, because the chickens aren't safe to eat unless you do chlorinate them. We don't have to chlorinate our chickens because we have rules and regulations and standards, which mean we produce chickens to a standard which means that chlorination is unnecessary. So we really do have to face this fact, and that is that international trade is not a mechanism of racing to the bottom. We have to say, in trading with us, we are the customer. If we buy from you, there are standards we expect to have. Now, that will make negotiations with America very difficult. But I've never thought that a free trade area arrangement with America is going to be easy anyway, because I've actually done the negotiations for a year for rather odd reasons, not just 6 months, but for a year. I negotiated with the for the European Union with the United States on agricultural matters. And all I can tell you is that outside the meeting places wherever we met in the United States were large numbers of people who were all the American farm lobby. And America subsidizes its farmers per farm more than any other country in the world, except possibly Norway. Now, the other bit we've got to remember is, are we really going to have a deal on the basis that their subsidized products, not meeting our standards, should be exported into this country in order to undermine our farmers? I find that absolutely unacceptable, and it's not something that we can put up with on any basis at all. Otherwise, I've got no view on it.
Thank you for that. As you can probably see, I'm back now from voting, and thank you, Robin, for chairing in the meantime. I'm told by the whip, so I don't have to go and vote again, at least not till 8 o'clock, so that's good. So the other questions that I've got, I don't think they've been asked yet, from Natalie Bennett, who I saw here, hello, who says, I'm really glad horticulture was mentioned. What do you see as the chief barriers for massive expansion in horticulture in England in particular?
We're a very odd country. We've always been rather unhelpful to the horticultural industry. I remember when I was Minister of Agriculture to discover that if you had a drought, the horticultural industry didn't have any claim on water. And yet, of course, the horticulture industry is the industry that most needs water, because what it produces has to have water. And so we changed the law. And that is another example of how you have to change laws and restrictions in order to advance green matters. I'm very much in favour of the British horticultural industry. It has become more and more efficient and more understanding of what the public wants. Again, I do hope that we will be able to support the Agricultural and Horticultural Training Board and the work that they are doing. There is a difficulty in British agriculture and horticulture, is that we're not very good at cooperation. We're much less good than the French, and we've really got to learn to do it better. And we've also got to learn to market it better. There's a great deal that can be done to make British food not only more efficiently produced, but I think we can make it much more attractive for sale. And we've really got to do that. And that's a two-sided thing. Of course, the government must support. We should learn a lot from the Irish, from the way that they help their industry to sell their products. And it is a government help that comes. But we can also, among our farmers and horticulturalists, learn something too. And that is that we've got to be better at working together. Cooperation really does matter in these areas. And I'm afraid we have been too unwilling to cooperate. If we learnt cooperation from the French and how to sell from the Irish, then I think we'd do very much better.
Thank you. So another question here from Rupalinaha Williams, who presumably is here somewhere, I'm not quite sure where. Hello everyone, what role does Lord Deben see the transition to a circular resource economy and investment in domestic recycling infrastructure playing in the UK's post-COVID recovery plans, particularly given the plastic industry's recent and aggressive lobbying against single-use plastics legislation and bans around the world?
Well, you can't expect industry not to lobby and things that it would like to do, and I just accept that and say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? I think is the phrase which one uses here. Well, first of all, there has been a setback which we do have to recognise, and that is that in a world in which single-use plastic had become a really unattractive or possibility, we then have COVID-19, and people going shopping, you know, really have made a change. Instead of buying loose vegetables, they prefer to buy vegetables which were in plastic packs because they don't want their vegetables touched by other people. And so there are some real issues about how we get back from this position. And I think the first thing is to say that plastic of itself does have some really great advantages. It really does provide protection. It really does lengthen life of products, and it does mean that people get products in a much better condition. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when there wasn't anything of this sort, and where most of the vegetables we bought were in a pretty darn awful condition. Now, that's very often why I remember my father growing as much vegetable as possible, because if you went round to the village shop, you got something that had been up to Covent Garden and come down from Covent Garden, and by the time it was a wilted lettuce, quite hard to make it into anything worthwhile. So there is a real truth that plastic has a part to play. So I start the other way round and say, first of all, we shouldn't be using any that we don't need to use. Secondly, we should make it impossible to produce things in plastic that can't be recycled. There's no place for polystyrene, for example, whole range of things that we can get rid of. And then if everything is if every plastic is in fact recyclable, the third thing we've got to do is to get away with this ludicrous concept that local authorities somehow or other upset their independence by the fact that they all have different things that they'll recycle. And we ought to have a basic standard recycling provision by all local authorities around the country, so that you can actually say on things, this can be recycled, not this could be recycled in many parts of the country, which means nothing to anybody. It should be very clear. And, you know, it is a sadness that it was a Conservative government that overturned the recommendation of the Quality of Life Commission, which I chaired, which was that we should do that. And the government, we went in promising to do it, and it was a Conservative government that decided not to do it on the basis of local autonomy. Now, I really do have to say, I do not think that it upsets Suffolk, East Suffolk, if it has to have the same standards of recycling as Central Suffolk. Really, this is not a sensible argument about differentials. So let's get that right. And the last thing I think we have to do is that we have to recognise that we need to get not only things to be recyclable, but we need to have a mechanism whereby recycling works, which is why I'm very much in favour of the extended producer responsibility, which the government is consulting upon now, and which it's promised to go ahead with. And I would be very disappointed if this government held that up because of the pressure of the worst bits of the industry. And I must say, I declare interest because my company works with a number of plastic manufacturers, and I have to say there are some very good people in the industry who have been doing their best to reduce the packaging and to make sure that it's entirely recyclable. So we ought to be supporting the good and condemning the bad.
Okay, and I strongly agree with that. I see that Barbara Young, you had your hand up, I think, wanting to ask a question. If you unmute yourself, you can ask a question.
I already had asked it. I forgot to take my hand back down again. Thanks very much, Anthony.
Right, okay, fair enough. Former chair of the Environment Agency, I think. Another question from Tom Fewins. How can we work with government to get wetlands recognised as a vital part of our national or natural infrastructure and ensure this recovery is not only green, but blue?
Well, I so much agree. There are so many things that we ought to be doing and that can be done so easily. First of all, why on earth have we not banned the use of peat? for horticultural purposes. It is ridiculous. We're spending money on peatland restoration and allowing people to dig peat up at the same time and import peat from other countries which make their soil more dangerous for climate change and the like. So first of all, I ban peat, horticultural peat, at once. The second thing that I would do is certainly to put more emphasis on peatland restoration and on wetlands restoration. But I'd go further than that. One of the ways in which we could do a great deal about climate change is in fact to recognize how important are the oceans for this. Kelp, for example, is a very important way in which we can draw the carbon out of the atmosphere. And there is no reason at all why we should be allowing so much of the kelp to be destroyed, and we could do a great deal to do that. So every level of wetlands, from peat restoration through the wetlands of which your question asks, to the sea coast, there's a great deal that we can do and could do immediately.
Excellent, thank you. I certainly agree with banning peat, and I don't know why we've done it. A question from Deirdre Brock. What future role does Lord Deben see for district heating schemes, I think, it says hearing schemes, district heating schemes, particularly those powered by heat exchange systems?
Well, I see a great future about it, but again, it all needs kind of planning in advance. The difficulty at the moment is that that on the one hand, we're trying to make the planning system less onerous and ensuring that people are more likely to say yes. But on the other hand, we're not recognizing that the thing that we ought to be doing in the planning system is to make sure that these things like district heating schemes are not only possible but encouraged, and in some cases actually essential, to allow particular schemes to go forward. We just aren't willing to recognize that. And it's right from one end to the other about our environmental attitude towards planning. Just along the road between your constituency and where I'm sitting, Anthony, they are at the moment, Persimmon are wanting to cut down some old oak trees. They don't seem to think that this is a matter for them to think seriously about. When asked why they were doing it, they said, well, before we do anything like this, we asked an ecologist whether this is acceptable in the law. In other words, if it's legal, we'll do it. There's no concept that you think about what contribution this might make to the community, what contribution this might make to sustainable development. What you say is, what can I get away with under the law? Now, it seems to me that that's the first bit we've got to change. And then once you start thinking about it in those terms, then you do start planning, saying, well, before you have this particular estate or this particular new development, then we've got to think about how the heating is going to take place. And by 2025, after all, you're not going to be able to link up with a fossil fuel system. And therefore, what about doing a district heating scheme? District heating does work. It's not like people used to do when it was absolutely boiling in the summer and totally cold in the winter, and that you couldn't alter your own heating and all that. All that's changed. I think people have got a bad history to it. But we will only do that if we are thinking much more in the round when we come to development, and if local authorities and the government set examples and standards, which at the moment I'm afraid we haven't got.
Okay, thank you very much. Got another question just in from Emma and Martin Vignert. Do you think hydrogen should be a part of the solution to achieve climate targets? District heating could be one area. You mentioned hydrogen in your introduction, but I don't think you expanded on it.
Yes, I'm very much in favour of recognising that hydrogen may well be part of our future. I mean, it's very difficult to pick winners, of course, but there is no doubt that hydrogen offers a number of advantages which we don't see any alternative to. For example, it is going to be quite difficult to replace diesel as far as heavy goods vehicles are concerned. And it may well be that hydrogen fuel cells and the like, that will be the answer. But we won't know, and indeed we're not going to be at the heart of this unless we start doing things on the hydrogen economy. So there are some good things that are being done. Northern Gas, for example, is testing some plans about whether you could put hydrogen into the normal gas grid. There are certain plans going forward with hydrogen for hydrogen hubs in places where you've got a lot of heavy industry, particularly in the northeast, a good area where unemployment is high and where we really could be spending some money on it. There is a real amount of work of research because, of course, the problem at the moment is that hydrogen is very expensive in energy terms to formulate. So there is a great deal, and I believe the government should be seeing hydrogen as one of the areas in which new investment should take place. It will produce new jobs, and I have a belief that we might find ourselves able to become the world centre in hydrogen development.
Excellent. I have one question from you for myself. I'm on the Finance Bill Committee legislating for the budget. It's one of my tasks for the next couple of weeks. And in there, the government has legislated for either a carbon tax or a UK emissions trading scheme. This is obviously post-Brexit. We're part of the European trading scheme at the moment. We won't be. What do we do afterwards? And the government's given it both. It's given itself both options. Which one would you think would work best? Either a UK version of the carbon emissions trading scheme or a carbon tax? Or would you have both? Belt and braces.
Well, I don't have belt and braces. I mean, it seems to me that it's usually true that it isn't either or, but it's both and to some degree. I mean, here is a situation in which the low price of oil ought to lead us to increase the tax that we have on petroleum products. It seems to me that that was what we have recommended. The government's going to be very short of money. I don't see why we should enter this time. The one thing that really drops in price is petrol at the pumps and diesel at the pumps. So I would certainly increase the tax on that. It seems to me that there is a problem. We've been asked, and we're giving our advice to the government on what a carbon trading scheme might look like. We have warned that there is a problem of doing a carbon trading scheme on the small scale. And I have to admit, Anthony, that we should not have decided that we have to be outside the European trading scheme, because you need to have a bigger trading scheme. And our view should have been that we extend the European trading scheme beyond it. And I do get worried. I mean, I know that I have a very clear view about our membership of the European Union, but even if I try to put that aside, I have to say I do get worried about people who knee-jerk react that you can do nothing with your neighbours because you've decided to leave the European Union. Now, I still think it was the wrong thing to decide, but the one thing that is even worse is to say that you can't find anything that you do with your neighbours except a few good words. Now, the fact is, we seem to have decided that we can't be part of the European trading scheme. I think if we're going to have one, we want one that is as congruent with it as possible, because there are real difficulties, technical difficulties of a limited trading scheme over a limited economy. And that's why the Chinese, for example, who have several trading schemes, have tried to make them all congruent with the European trading scheme, because they saw the advantage of that taking place. And they didn't have a Brexit issue.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question on behalf of my colleague Jerome Mayhew, the Conservative MP from Broadlands, who's joined us, having just voted. But I know an issue that's been that he's been thinking about recently is green finance and the difficulty of attracting long-term finance from our pension funds that want long-term stable returns into green infrastructure projects. Some money has gone in, but not very much. Do you see that as a particular problem? And are there things that should be done to attract more long-term investment into green infrastructure projects?
Well, the truth is that the biggest change that has happened over the past 2 years, even one would have said before COVID, the last 6 months, has been the conversion of most of the finance industry towards understanding what ESG is, what they should be doing as far as the future is concerned. And they're beginning to understand that sustainability is actually a financial measure, and that if you're not sustainable, it's not a very sensible thing to invest your money money in a company. And so they are beginning to change their view on this. And many pension funds have been doing it. But Caroline Lucas and I had the most embarrassing meeting with the Parliamentary Pension Fund, because the Parliamentary Pension Fund has been investing in fossil fuels and the like, and has not been taking the climate change issue seriously. And the chairman of it said, well, he didn't have any mandate to do that. Well, I'm sorry, that is not so. Happily, they have changed. But if we have to fight, a cross-party operation has to fight to get the Parliamentary Pension Fund, when Parliament has voted again and again with tiny minorities against on the issues of climate change, just shows how difficult it is. But I do think more and more pension funds are taking this seriously. And after all, if you're looking after the funds of people who are going to retire in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, you really want to not be investing in people who are actually going to end up with a lot of stranded assets. So sustainability becomes crucial. I think it's moving in that direction. I think the government might be able to help that. And it might set an example itself in the way in which it insists upon the terms of those pension funds over which it has some real influence.
Thank you, and I certainly agree with that. I'm going to ask one last question. We've got just a few minutes left. If you could wave a magic wand and get what you wanted, is there one thing? What is the one thing, your top priority, that you'd want the government to do?
You mean not go back on Brexit? That would be my first thing, because that's the worst. That is the worst thing. It's going to make things everything even worse. But yeah. I mean, no. Well, I have to tell the truth. You asked me a question. That is what if I cannot wave that wand, I'll tell you what I might know. I'll tell you what one thing the government would do. I really do think it is to use its power as a purchaser to extend the green economy, to make sure that everything that it buys, it asks the questions that we ought to ask about resource, about resilience, about the way in which it treats workers. The social issue is really important. Look what's happening in the United States at this moment. Just think of what the realities of the world that we live in now. So all those things, the ESG, the environment, social and governance issues, are the issues which government ought to put at the top of their list. And of course they must get the best price they can. But if they bought constantly with an eye to sustainability and making that the center of the issue, we would change our society very much for the better.
Well, definitely, I take that message and pass it on. I certainly agree with that. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's been 1 hour, the first virtual session of the APPG, and I think I'm going to declare it a great success. We've had 40 people throughout most of the time. As I said at the beginning, we were recording it, and we'll send a link to the recording out to members. Before you all go, just two other appointments that we have as well. We've got George Eustace, the Environment Secretary, talking on the 24th of June at 4 p.m, talking about the environment and agriculture bills, answering questions on that. And then we have on the 14th of July at 4 p.m, we've got Lord Deben talking about a green recovery, 7 priorities to help the global economy recover. And we'd be interested in your feedback on these virtual sessions. They seem to work quite well. It might actually be easier than coming into Parliament. Obviously, you don't have a lot of choice now, but we might in future try and do a lot more of them. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming along, and thank you particularly to Lord Deben. I'm going to give you a round of applause.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.